Hi, I'm Adam, and welcome to Sunflower Woodworking. All right, so if you've been following our story, you'll know that we have opened a store. We've opened a few stores, but we are at Logan Village Mall here in Noblesville, Indiana. We do have a space set up there, and we've been working for the last couple months since the Christmas holidays to refresh the store. So we had a good amount of stock before the holidays and sold a bunch of stuff in November, December. But then wanted to kind of improve because our shop, I'm going to be honest, is a little vanilla. We did put forward a lot of effort to kind of make some nice shelving and that, but it's very open and people walk by, they peek their head in the door, they look around and then they walk out. So because everything is just lining the wall. So we want to do a few things. Number one, we want to kind of organize a little bit differently with our store. And we wanted to make 3 different sections, and we've done this on our website as well. We've kind of rebranded all of our products into 3 categories, and with signature, with things that are kind of one-offs, like we're going to do one and done, and then our creations line, which are things that things that are really unique, or things that we're most proud of, or things that we've invested a lot more time and effort into. So we're going to set the store up the same way. So we've been hard at work making a ton of products. And then at the same time, we want to make a shelf, a display shelf for the center of the store so that folks are drawn into it. There's a little bit more to see, kind of breaks up the environment a little bit. So after looking at all kinds of designs and ideas and that, we settled on something a little different. So what we decided to do was we're going to make a 3-tier shelf. And I'll put a picture like over there or over there. But a 3-tier shelf for the center of the store. And we are going to use, well, pine. So pine isn't the densest wood, but it is a display table. We wanted something that was going to be pretty easy to work with, pretty quick to build. And didn't want to invest hundreds and hundreds of dollars into stock with oak or something else for at least this point in time. Plus, we want to try out some new techniques, new to us, that pine would be a little bit easier to work with because it's a little more pliable in some of the things we're going to try, and you'll see what we mean. What I mean as soon as we get further into the video. So what we've done is we've cut all of our boards for the 3 tiers, for the legs and for the tabletop. And now what we got to do is mill it down. And what you saw in the picture is we're going to do kind of 2x4 corners with a 45-degree taper. So that's the first single cut, is that 45-degree taper, so the legs kind of wrap around. And then on the sides of the legs, we're going to cut strips, and those strips are going to curve up into the tabletop to add a little bit more rigidity to the table. So instead of doing an apron around the bottom and doing all kinds of hardware, we're going to actually mount the legs directly into the table body on all 3 levels and see how that works. So really excited to try that out. And we think it's going to add a little bit of flavor to that environment, start showcasing a little bit more of what we can do, because right now all our store has are like bandsaw boxes and things that we can make that are small. Our apple boxes, which are really popular, some of our jewelry boxes and treasure boxes and whatnot. That's really what's in there. But we want to start over the next few months, start showcasing more of the furniture that we've created and the things that we could create there. So without any further ado, without any further babble, let's get cutting. Okay, so we got all the 45s cut for the legs. We'll go back to the legs in a few minutes after we get something else done with the table saw. As you know, we got a small shop, so spaces are premium, so we got to finish off one stage before we move on to the next. So what we're going to do now is we're going to rip the edge off of the 2x4s. Because when you look at a 2x4, you'll notice that these edges are rounded. All 4 edges are rounded. And that will become a problem later on. Because these boards are the ones we're going to be using for the tabletop. So it is going to be pretty thick. It's going to be 1.5 inches thick. Pine is a relatively strong wood. It does dent easy, which is why we usually don't use it in furniture. But for this, it's a display shelf, so it should be safe. But anyway, we're going to glue up these boards side by side to make the tabletop. And we're using our domino today to add a little bit more strength. But what's going to happen is if we don't cut off those rounded edges, then what you'll have on the surface of the table is you have these little ridges where the boards meet. So we want to eliminate that. So we're going to rip off, go through all the boards, rip off one edge, and then reset our fence, and then go back through and rip off the other edge. So let's continue cutting. All right, so we've got all the boards cut and, well, we got the edges ripped and pretty happy with the results. So we got nice good glue joints on all these 2x4s. But what I noticed while we were doing the rip cuts on these using our ripping blade, that the top has a lot of defects, marks, whatnot, and that the boards themselves would probably do well with a pass through the planer. So we're going to crack out the planer and spend a few minutes and run all these boards. We're not going to do the legs because that's going to start messing with our angles, and plus the board's not going to be fully supported because we do have that taper on it now, so we'll bend a little bit, but we'll use some wood filler and some sanding to take care of those later. But the tabletop we're a little bit more concerned about. So I'm going to get the planer out and run these through the planer. Let's get planing. So all the planing's done, and we lined up all of our boards. Now they look like they're not joining up, it's just they're all cattywampus. But ran a line across. After I had them all lined up, had them all sitting the way I wanted, ran a line across, because that's going to be my marker so I can make sure that the dominoes line up correctly. And then just some arrows to remind myself which way the boards are facing, because we do have a couple boards, like the end boards, that I'm only going to put the dominoes on one side. We're going to put them about every 7 inches, starting about 4 inches from the end. I do have some boards that are originally going to be legs that are now going to be part of the table because I want to make the table bigger and I didn't need them for legs. So we're going to reuse those. We'll cut that all down later on after we get the glue up. So next step is to get the domino holes all cut. And after we cut all the domino holes, then we'll go back and do our glue up, which pretty wide glue up, but we got some big clamps to hold this together. And if the dominoes and everything works well, then we shouldn't have too much cupping and whatnot. The other thing we did is we were conscious of the wood grain. Now, different woodworkers have different opinions. Some have no problems, some do have problems, but we did alternate which way the grain was facing. That should help reduce any kind of cupping and whatnot later on. But I've made tables and made other things where even after a year we had no cupping or anything else and we didn't alternate that grain. But to be fair, you know, most of the lumber I get, I do try to use quarter sawn as much as possible. It's a lot more stable in the way that it behaves. But all wood, regardless of finish, unless you completely embed it in epoxy, and even then it's questionable, but all wood is going to absorb and expel moisture. All of these boards that are about 7% moisture content right now, I am in a climate controlled shop, but the moisture level out here is a little bit lower because it is winter time. So we'll probably, once we get this glued up, put it in the house and see how she does. But anyway, so yeah. There was something else I was going to say. Ficado. Okay, so we've got all the holes drilled out for the dominoes and all pretty clean. What we're going to do now is clean up the holes and do a dry fit on all the pieces. So it will take a little bit of time, you know, put it all together and then pull all the pieces back out. But at least with the dry fit, we know that everything's going to line up well, because the last thing we want to do is find that maybe one of our black marks, because a couple of them were a little bit wide, so don't want the black marks to misguide where I put the holes. So just to be sure, we'll do the dry fit, make sure all the holes line up before we get to gluing, because there's nothing worse than getting to gluing and realizing your domino holes or your dowel holes don't line up because, you know, maybe the tool moved a little bit or some other reason. So we're going to go ahead and do a dry fit. So let's get fitting. Dry fit done, got everything taken apart and ready to do the glue up. So for something of this size and for bigger projects, I typically use, and this is not an advertisement, I don't have any tie-ins with them, but I really do like Titebond glues. Usually TB3 is what I use the most in my shop. When doing bandsaw boxes and doing quick glue ups, I'll often use their speed set. But for things like this, I do the extended working time glue. It's a Titebond 2, but it's the extended working time, so it gives you a few extra minutes to actually, with working time, to actually get it all set up and put together before clamping down. So I've done a project a couple months ago where I used TB3, and it took me a half an hour to assemble all these small pieces, and then by the time I got down to doing the final clamp down, it wasn't clamping anymore. Some of the pieces were already stuck, and there were so many I just could not get the shear strength was very, very, very strong, so I couldn't get it all tightened down. So extended working time glue, Titebond 2, and yeah, so whew, let's get gluing. All right, so the glue up is done, and we've got our parallel clamps down on here, alternating to equalize the pressure across the boards. Enough pressure so that we get a nice even glue up, but not so much that we squeeze out all the glue. And then we put some cauls on the sides here, because even without a whole lot of pressure, this is pine, so pine likes to move a little bit more than hardwoods. So we put those cauls on here with these clamps to kind of keep it nice and flat while the glue cures. So we're going to leave it clamped up for about 12 to 24 hours. And then we'll come back and remove all the clamps and cauls and then probably sand it down. We got the bandsaw set up, and we're going to start making these strips to make the little curve, I don't know what you call those. If someone knows what those are called, put a comment. But we're going to make those strips that are going to curve out of the legs into the tabletop. Not going to add a ton of strength, but give it a little bit more rigidity, so it won't allow the legs to shift at all, because like I said, we're not doing an apron on this table with screws. We're going to embed the legs directly into the tabletop. So next, we're going to cut those strips into the 2x4s or into the legs and prepare the legs for glue up. So let's get cutting. All right, so finished assembling all the tabletops. Remember, there are 3 of them, and you saw kind of gluing up on one. Since it glue up, we've cleaned off all of the excess glue, sanded them down. We did the 80 grit because they're pretty well lined up and everything, so there wasn't a ton of sanding. So we did the 80 grit and then took it back with 120 grit. That's about as far as I'm going to go in sanding until we get a finish on it, and then I'll probably, in between coats, do a 220. But what we're going to do now is actually install the legs. And, you know, I learn all kinds of new stuff all the time. Never done this before. There are different techniques for doing this. Normally you would put the legs together and then do the splines and then just glue them to the leg. We're trying to do it in one solid piece. May not have been the best decision, but we're going to try it and see how this works out. So we're going to start off on the smaller table. As you see here, we've got our legs. And we've got our splines cut out and sanded. And there are going to be 2 of these. Oops. There are going to be 2 of these per corner. Essentially going to make a 90-degree angle. It'll be a corner leg. And then those splines will go into the side right here. Now on the smaller tables, we have 3 different sizes because we are doing that kind of that 3-tier display table. So we got the large one there, the medium one, and then this is the small one that's going on top, right? So different size legs, different number of splines, and then the distance that we're going to do from the main leg body to space the spline is going to be smaller as we move up to the smaller size. And the reason is because, as you can see, when we look at the smaller leg, we don't get a whole lot of playroom there, right? So we can't go too far. The bending, you know, I could steam it or wet it and try and bend it a little bit more, but don't want to force it and don't want to spend too much time. Because then when we look at the medium legs for the middle tier and then the taller legs for the bottom tier, you see that the splines are a lot more flexible. They're longer, so we can do a lot more bending. So those will be further apart. So on the top one, not going to be a whole lot of distance, and as we move down to the bigger tabletops over there, we'll space out the splines even more. All right? So now, what I'm going to try to do is, now I obviously can't put these together ahead of putting them, cutting the slots for the splines, because one's got to go in this way, one's got to go in that way. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to, got the tabletop turned over, I'm going to clamp these together, turn them over upside down, and then mark off the corner here and the corner, so you'll put 1 set per corner and mark up the corner on where I'm going to cut. Because what I want to do is, I would like the table legs to actually come through and be flush with the top of the table. And then I'm going to use dowels to, in addition to glue, I'm going to use dowels to affix the legs to the top, right? So still a lot of things to figure out. And like I said, I'm learning, gonna make some mistakes here, but hey, if you got ideas, you got other ways you've done this aside from the obvious one, which is don't do the splines out of the same block, you know, cut the individual strips. That's, you know, definitely gonna be a lot easier. But if you got other ideas, leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you got, or, you know, see what you've done with it before. All right, here we go. All right, so we got all the legs marked up on the tabletop. So we marked where the legs are going to sit, and then we also marked where the splines are. Now, because of the way I made those splines, they're all a little bit different size, so I had to go ahead and mark each spline, the thickness of each spline on there. I'm going to cut within those marks in order to get them to seat right, and probably have to do a little finagling here or there. So now we're going to go over to, well, after I move some stuff, we're going to move over to the bandsaw and cut the stuff out. We're going to start with one, see how it goes, see what adjustments we have to make, and then use that learning to apply to the other 3 legs. So let's get cutting. All right, so we always try with the best of intentions, try something new, and sometimes it just doesn't work. So we tried with cutting these grooves, having these splines attached, cutting it out of the 2x4 itself, so these were attached, and trying to get that in there. I was able to get it all seated and get it all flush, get it all just the way I wanted. But then what we try to do is get them so we can glue up all 4 corners at the same time, and use the clamps to kind of make sure that they're all at the 90-degree angles from all the different from this side and this side. But even with the extended working time glue, it took about 20 minutes to try and get that one leg seated. And so you put 20 minutes on each of those. The extended working time glue only gives you a couple extra minutes, so that was going to take too long, and we would have things setting up before be setting up on the glue on one leg before we could get to the next one. So we had to change gears. So what we decided to do was to cut the splines off the legs that for all the legs we had the splines on. Now for the top table, we already did that. We put a little curve in it. But for the other 2 tables legs, we cut the splines off. That was painful because it took a lot to get them all evenly spaced and even sizes, but it's okay. We adjust. And what we're going to do is make some out of black walnut. So I'm already using black walnut dowels to fix the legs and to, the legs are actually 2x4s with a 45-degree angle. And then they're held together with some black walnut dowels. So since we already have black walnut introduced on this project, I'm going to go ahead and make the splines out of black walnut. So you can see we got some longer ones here for the longer legs, 16 total. And then we got some for the second tier. And then we're going to take some of the scraps, see how that goes. And we might take some of the scraps and then make a couple splines for the legs on the top table. But we'll see how that all comes together. So what we're going to do now is go around the table, maybe make a jig to make these cuts cleaner, but make these cuts all the way around on the 4 corners, glue in the legs, put the black walnut dowels on, get that all fixed, and then we'll glue in the splines and see how that goes. All right, so did a couple things. First thing is I made this jig, which then I can clamp onto the edges of the table. I just clamp this piece here onto the face of the table, and then it allows me to use my power saw to cut through the table to make the slots for the splines. I was using a jigsaw before, but I wasn't getting straight cuts or consistent cuts. So this allows me to get really nice, good straight cuts. I use a pencil to mark. I can look down through the groove that's here in the top of the jig. And I'll show you what that looks like probably tomorrow. But you can see the lines, line it up. It is basically it's the size of the blade. So I get a 0 line here, so I can put this edge looking down into it, put this edge right on the line and do one cut, slide it over, do the next cut, and then I get really good, things falling around. Then we got the splines themselves. So I made these out of some black walnut I've got in here. I ended up having to make a lot more than I originally anticipated. I don't know what I was counting, but I definitely counted only half of what I actually needed because I'm putting 3 splines per leg, and some of them are a little snug, so I had to do a little bit of sanding to get that gap nice and fitting. The glue helps it slide in there, and then we clamp it down, and now we got these splines sticking up. And what we'll do later is after we get the legs glued on and get the dowels in to get the legs on, then we'll take these and we'll clamp them back together, put a little bit of glue down inside the splines, and then clamp them together to create that nice curvature effect. It's hard to show you on this, but you'll just see it once we get to that point. But it'll give us a nice curve and give us that nice color contrast between the pine and the black walnut. and it'll give us a little bit more strength. And what we'll probably do is put a dowel through here as well to kind of give it a little bit more strength, keep it nice and aligned over time, even though we're using Titebond 3, which is waterproof and will give us good adhesion. Probably do want to put a dowel in there just to keep it pulled together, right? So we're going to let this set overnight. We're going to come back tomorrow, do the next layer of sanding on the rest of the splines, and we even made some really nice ones for the bottom table. So we'll get that all sanded down, get the rest of these splines put in, and then we'll start putting the legs on. All right, so I didn't record much of the footage of putting these legs on and putting the splines in because there were so many things that were going wrong. Plus, I wanted to kind of get the process down in my head to be able to show you, you know, like anything, there's 101 ways to do it, and there's probably a million ways better to do it than the way I'm doing it. I watched a few videos, but to some degree, I'm trying to figure things out a little bit on my own. So, so if you got a better way, as always, put a comment, give me a thumbs up, put a comment, tell me how you would do it, or send me a link to a video that shows you a way that you would probably approach this. But the deep learning, I didn't want to be, you know, interacting with the camera while I'm trying to figure things out. So when we get to the third tier, the bigger table, I definitely throw some footage around on that so you can actually see how this stuff came together. But it's all glued up right now, so let's see what it looks like. So as you can see, there's one dowel on each side. Now, what I'm thinking with the third tier, now in the first two tiers, I did, because the splines were originally part of the leg and attached, I needed the top of the leg to come through to get those splines to go through. Yeah, there's 101 ways I could have done this. So originally I cut out a seat for the leg out of the top of the table. So what it looks like, I'll show you on the smaller one. You actually see the leg of the table come through the top. And I love seeing the end grain. This will be, have a finish on it with a homemade wipe-on poly. But you know, this is all glued, and then there's a dowel through here and a dowel through here. So that's the same thing that we've got going on with this leg here. So there's a dowel here and a dowel there. And then you'll be able to see the end grain. Now what I might do on the bigger table over there, instead of coming through the surface, I might just put the legs and do a butt joint and then bring the dowels through the top into the legs that way. Because while that's not providing a ton of strength, believe it or not, these splines are adding a good deal of strength to this leg as well. I wish you could feel this. Now there is a little bit of give in it, which I don't think I ever wanted a table leg that didn't have some kind of give, because tables move, people move them. If it doesn't have any give, that's where you'll start getting cracks and breaks. So it does have a little bit of movement in it. But up here, we've got it clamped. Again, the Titebond 3 up in there, in between the layers. And I put this ultrafine painter's tape on here. Something I did before in another project, want to try it again on this. It helps keep the glue from dripping down above this, because it's going to be a bear to try and get in there and sand or try and get that glue out if it drips. So by putting that there, I also control where the glue goes just a little bit so it doesn't go too much further than the tape line there. But definitely if it drips down, which it didn't put too much glue on it, but if it did come down a little bit, it'll be on the tape and not on the wood itself. So it'll give us a little bit cleaner look. Never did it with this close together, so it's going to be interesting to see when I take that tape off how it comes apart, being that that part is under a little bit of pressure. What I will do next, after I get this these clamps pulled apart, probably about where you see this bottom clamp here. Let's see if we can get in there a little bit tighter. There, right there. Where that bottom clamp is there, I'll probably put a dowel through there. I'm thinking through maybe a dowel with a T-head on it, just to kind of give it a little bit more long-term hold. I don't think the glue is ever really going to give, but these are under a little bit of pressure, so they may eventually pull away in time with movement, with whatever else. So I might still put a dowel, or put a dowel with a T-head on it to keep that pulled back. But for the most part, yes, they're clamped up, so it's going to be a little bit stronger than once I take the clamps off, but they are all pretty solid. Used a lot of clamps. I could have probably put a block underneath this to help keep this flat. I didn't see a whole lot of dimpling underneath the clamps, but we'll definitely see what that looks like once the clamps come off and see if we have any dimples. And, you know, doing the smaller table, doing the medium-sized table before I do the bigger table, again, giving a lot of learning on this one before I get to the big one, because like I showed in the last clip, we actually had to create all these nice long black walnut splines, leaving some sapwood, some spalting in there, going to bring some real good character, because the tables, you know, they are basically box store 2x4, so there's a lot of defects, and you know, the knots, the variations in grain, all intentionally left. I wanted that look out of these tables. So now with the splines, you actually see, you know, there's some sapwood in there fading into the hardwood. We've got a lot of variation from one set of legs to the next, one set of splines to the next. So keeping that variation going, but the darkness from the black walnut will really, I think, really pop with these dowels and really add a nice accent color to the table. So what I'm probably going to do is, you know, like I said, after the clamp up time, about 24 hours, take the clamps off. I'll probably put a dowel in at the top part of the splines, just add just a little bit more strength. But the next cut, we will actually see I'll roll out more footage on the assembly of the bigger table, including showing you the jig that was used to actually make these cuts, show you that in action. It's down there on the floor right now. Show you that jig in action, and then show you actually putting the splines in and all the glue up and stuff for that. So let's get waiting. So we got the legs glued up, as you just saw. Now what you didn't see is getting the legs prepped. So of course, 45-degree angle, measuring out and all other things to figure out how wide I wanted the legs to be. And then wanted a 45-degree angle. So we did that on the table saw. But then we did the countersinking here for the screws. Now you can see there's a screw in this hole and not in that hole. So this hole is aesthetic. So I do have dowels or plugs. I will plug those holes. But for the aesthetic, I wanted the hole on both sides lined up. And see, I did, on these longer legs, did 4 screws. The screws are really just meant to add a little bit of clamping strength to this. Obviously, you can see they're all clamped up. But the screws really just a tiny bit more strength, but really the glue is going to do the heavy lifting. So put glue all the way through. So what I'll do is once we get past the clamping time, maybe even waiting a good 12 to 24 hours, I'll go back through and put, I got a dowel, and I'll just plug those up and cut the dowel off. But because I wanted that aesthetic, the screws are kind of alternating to some degree. So this side on the top, but then in the middle 2 screws are on this side. And then on the bottom, it's back over to this side. And a good amount of glue all the way down the edge on the inside, just to give it that strength and that bond. And like I said, just reinforced with the screws. So while all 4 legs are in their cure cycle, we're going to go ahead and get the tabletop back off the table here, off the working table. And then we're going to cut the slots now using our jig, cut the slots that we need for, what are those things called again? I forgot what those things are called. We're going to cut the slots for the splines just like we did for this table. But I'll actually show you how we did that with a little jig that we threw together in about 5 minutes. That definitely helped a lot with getting these lined up and getting some really good, nice, even slots using the power saw. So to prepare for making the slots for the splines, we measured out what basically a blocking space for where the leg's going to come through. And it's about 75 millimeters. And then spaced about 25 millimeters in between each spline. Now, we got that by measuring. So on that table over there, the middle table, we got the spacing, one that worked well with the strength of and the bendability of the Black Walnut splines, but also gave enough spacing where aesthetically it looks balanced. So we took the dimensions of that table and the dimensions of this table, did a little math, so divided one into the other, got a ratio, and then measured the distance of the splines on the other table, and then used that ratio and multiplied it out to get this 25 millimeter space. It's about 15 millimeters on the other table, so these are going to be 25 millimeters apart. So we marked those on the top just to get all of our, we did that all 4 corners to get our spacing down. And then using a square, brought those down onto the side. And this is going to be our guide for where we're going to make the cuts using our jig and the power saw. So let's get that thing set up and let's see what that looks like. So you just saw the cut, and there's 2 markings, of course, on here for each piece. Now, these spline slots are wider than the curve for the blade, so we do 2 marks, one on the right, one on the left. So we line up the sled on one side, make the cut, then come back and line up the sled on the other side and make the second cut. Now, the jig has a 3/4 inch birch ply, Baltic birch ply base, so getting light down in the groove is a little bit difficult. So I had to use my cell phone camera because all of my portable shop lights are elsewhere in the house at the moment. Shine the light down in there, line it up on the right, make the cut, line it up on the left of the groove, make the cut, and then now when we do the press fit, nice and snug. Enough room to put some glue in there with it later on. Now, each of these splines are not exactly the same thickness, and each of these grooves are not going to be exactly the same thickness. So what we'll do later is once we get all the slots cut, we'll work through our stack of splines over there, a nice big stack of 32 splines, and find the ones that fit the best into each slot. And then usually left with a few at the end that either need to sand out the last couple slots to make them fit or shim them to make them fit better. But that's it. This is how we make the slots. So we'll come back here shortly after we get all the slots cut and then show you the fitting process. All right, so what we've done after we got all the slots cut, went through and did a fitting. So just process elimination, going through all the different slots with all the different splines, finding the best fit. Slightly snug, but not so snug that you got to slam it to get it in there, because this is pine. And what has happened, you can't really see it because we did a glue up down here, is just in the test fit, it actually snapped this piece. And then for some reason, when I picked up the table and moved the tabletop, this piece fell off. Don't know if I hit it, no idea, but this is pine. So that ligament bond in between the fibers is not very strong. It does break relatively easy. It's a strong wood, but definitely not a long grain, right? So a snug fit, most of them are pretty good. A couple of them we had to take some of the pieces we shaved off in the slot cutting process just to wedge in and make it a little bit tighter. And then after we get a side glued up, we're doing a couple things. One, clamping it down just to add a little bit of pressure. Not much, because you know everything is snug fit already, and with the glue it's more than enough. But just to add a little bit of that glue up pressure. It's not going to get a whole lot of pressure because these corners, and I don't want to put too much, because then it's going to pull away. This slot here is going to get pulled away and opened up a little bit, because as I pull this grain in, it's going to open up that end there. So we don't want too much pressure, just enough to give a little bit of that glue up pressure without affecting the rest of it. So I got the bundles here of the 4 sides. So I'm doing the 2 long sides first. So this is one side. I'll go back and do the other side here in a second. And then I'll come back and I'll do the ends and do the same thing. I did number all of them. So as I found a match, a close match for each slot, I put a number on the slot and then a number on the piece. And then right before I start doing the glue up, I erase these numbers with just a wet rag, and it comes right off, right? And then the other thing is, before I put the glue on, I'm going through each slot. I put it in its slot and I make a mark with a pencil on the top and a mark on the bottom, just so I know where my glue zone is, so I don't have too much glue going over. It shouldn't be too much of a problem once I cut off the excess down here, because as you can see, I'm using the table to kind of set my spacing, set everything up right. And to give this, because some of these slides are just a little loose, so I wanted to use the table to kind of stop it from sliding all the way through after the glue's on. But using those glue zones, there's not a whole bunch of drip and excess glue, and putting just enough to create the tack, create something that can soak into the side grain on the splines, and then the end grain that's inside there, inside the slots, enough to soak in and create that that long-term bond. And then finally, after I get them glued up, using my square right there, squaring them up, and then clamping the bundle together. So because some of these are still slightly loose when I first put them together, so I use a clamp up there just to kind of hold them all together, and they rely on each other for some strength to stand up straight. Right, so let's see what that looks like. All right, so we've done a couple things real quick. You saw we did the initial mounting of the legs, and we know that the glue, a butt joint like this and just glue is not going to be strong enough. Right now, that's just the first step. We're also going to put dowels, 3 dowels in each leg coming through the top. And then remember that these splines here will give a little bit of strength as well, and also help distribute the load just a little bit of the weight from the top of the table and transfer it down in through the legs up through here. So a couple of things I did off camera, just drill the holes and put in the feet, because we do want to be able to level this, because the floor in our shop is a little bit, it's concrete underneath, so it's with vinyl on top, so it's a little uneven in some spots. So want to be able to adjust if needed so that we get a nice flat table. And then I cut off the excess on the splines, basically just hold it together and then use my multi-tool, my oscillating multi-tool, just to slice that off. And then later on, we'll sand this, make it nice and flush after we get it glued. The only reason they're clamped right now is just to keep them pulled together, so that because when you actually clamp these down against the leg, it does change the length of it, the length of the splines. So I want to make sure they're clamped on basically where they're going to be going before I cut the excess off. Otherwise, I'll have an uneven cut once you clamp it down. So, and then the last thing we did was I do put 2-inch painter's tape in between the legs. Again, I think we showed it on the other table. Not necessary. I'm a little anal about the glue dripping, because I don't want the glue to drip on one of the splines higher than on another. So this just helps keeps the glue at bay so that it doesn't go any further than this spot here. It is a little bit of a pain to get that tape off after the fact. I learned some lessons from the last time. I put the opening and the excess tape on the same side. I only go across this once. The other one I was wrapping it around, and some of them was twice. That was even more difficult to get off. But it wasn't too bad. So learned a couple lessons to make sure that this tape is easy to get off. So the next piece is to actually get some glue and do the glue up for the splines. Let's get gluing. All right, so we got the splines all glued up and came out pretty good so far. So I did put a couple pieces of scrap, one piece under the top of the clamp, 2 pieces under the bottom. The 2 pieces are on the side where the splines are. And now I didn't have a problem when I did the smaller table with any kind of ripples in it from where the clamps were. But just in case, because these are longer and it's got a longer distance to go from the place where the glue stops all the way to the end, I went ahead and put a couple pieces of black walnut in there. It's not glued in. It's just distribute that pressure just a little bit, and also make sure that we don't get any kind of markings on the face, because the faces of the splines are already sanded to where I want it. The sides are not sanded yet, because what I do when I put these splines on is, it's kind of hard to see, but they're a little proud past the face of the leg. And that's so that, because there is a little unevenness, and even if I did them all square, some of them it tend to shift. So I made them a little wider than they needed to be. And I bring them out a little proud past the face of the leg. And then what I'll do later is with my chisels, with my hand plane, or with a sander, depending on which spline it is, I'll take that down and make it flush. And it also gives me a little bit of room too for, when you have the glue press out over here. I do wipe it up because just in case I miss a spot later before the finish, the glue will show through. But it leaves just a little bit more room for to play with the glue. So that way when I do take this down, I have a nice flush, tight surface, and it will look great. So now I just gotta wait till tomorrow night, and then I'll come back and take all the clamps off, put those away, and then I have these dowel tie downs that I made with some brass rod. Not really necessary. This is more than enough with the amount of glue I use, more than enough for it to stay in place. But here, I'll show you on the other table. Now these dowels go into the wood, and then there's a brass, and drill the hole straight through the center, and then there's a brass rod. Just give it a little bit more strength. Right there where the glue line is, right where that tape, the tape stopped right about there on these legs. So right below that line is where I put that dowel. Glue it in. It goes probably about 1.5 inches. So about 35 to 40 millimeters into the leg with some glue. And if not, it's a little bit of decoration, but just a little bit something more that if the glue does tend to, does weaken a little bit by the top of the spline, at least got this to hold it back and add a little bit more strength to it. Not a ton of strength, but just enough. And then probably the same day after we put those pins in through here, in through the splines, probably get the table turned over and then put the dowels in on the other side. And I have 3 dowels, and I'll show you. The 2 on the inside are fat and short. The ones on the outside are long and skinny, so to go a little bit deeper. But we'll take a look at that in a little bit more depth when we get to that point. So that's it for the evening. I think it's late. I don't even know what time it is. I can go to bed. See you tomorrow. Okay, so we got the table flipped over. My oldest daughter came in here and helped me out with that. And I went ahead and drilled the holes using a Brad Point drill bit. And used a bit that was not too snug because this is pine. And if I, normally if I'm using hardwood, I'll make the dowels a little bit more snug. But for this, what happened before on one of the other tables is when the dowel was as tight as I normally have it, once I had the glue in there and started hammering it home, it split the pine, so it doesn't stay together very well in that regard. So it is probably a 64th of an inch. The hole is about a 64th of an inch bigger than the actual dowel itself. So drilled all the holes, and now what I'm going to do is just take my carpenter's mallet and put some glue on these and drive them home. Still not sure. I did have markings for 3 holes. I had a longer dowel for the far corner to go through the meatier part of the leg, and it was probably about 50% longer than these dowels. I still might do that, but again, working with pine, I don't know that I want to remove that much more material. I got some meat that's in between the dowels and the dowel on the edge. That should be enough with the splines and the fact that the legs are glued underneath. That should be enough to kind of hold everything together. I mean, it's not a serving table. It's not one that's going to be moved around a lot, I hope. This is going to be in the store with the other 2 tables stacked on top of it, and then, lots of pretty things to display for customers. So we'll see. Let me get these glued up, and then after I glue these in, I'm going to start doing the finishing on the tabletop. I did cut down the excess on the splines just above the surface. Now, I could have taken it all the way down to the surface, but I didn't. Why? Well, because what I'm going to do is, this is a technique I've seen. If you check out my Inspiration Ideas playlist, you might see it in there. I have to check. I'm not sure if I saved that one. But it's videos I've seen from other woodworkers and craftspeople that kind of inspired me. Some funny stuff in there as well, but things that inspire me to kind of get me moving and give me ideas. So, but one of those videos, what the gentleman did was he just took some type-on wood glue, just regular wood glue, and what you can't see, maybe I'll put a clip in there for this, what you can't see is that there is a gap on some of the splines between the edge of the spline and the slot, and that's okay. So what I do is I pour a little bit of wood glue down in there, and then I sand until, well, I wipe off the excess, but then I sand on top of that with the wood from the splines. So you get that black walnut dust that'll mix in with that glue. Now, the finish isn't going to necessarily adhere better to that, and it probably still will show up a bit in the finish, but it gives us, at least if the finish doesn't hide it, or doesn't take enough of the finish, at least it's the same color as a spline, so it's not as noticeable, and more times than not, it gives me a pretty good result. I do have a putty that's meant for staining. I got a few spots on here. This is kind of my first time using it, where I'm going to have a more natural looking finish. I usually use it for stains and other things, or when I make my own dyed finishes. So I'm not sure how that filler is going to take an oil and poly mix, a boiled linseed oil and poly mix. So I only have a few small spots. I don't want to use it in such a prominent area, but we'll see how that behaves. And maybe in the future I'll just use that instead of the glue and sawdust technique. Right, so all that aside, let's get gluing. All right, let's see what we got. So nice and flush. Now the trick about sanding hardwood splines on a softer wood like pine is that if you don't keep your pressure even and pay attention, that the softer wood will sand out faster than the hardwood. So then what could happen is you get this ripple effect where the softer wood sanded away and the hardwood still protrudes a little bit higher. Yeah, we're talking about 1/28th, 1/64th of an inch. I mean, it's barely perceptible, but you can feel it. So being very careful to keep that sander moving, paying attention to the angle. You want to keep it flat. I tilt it in just a little bit when I get it over the spline, just to make sure I'm taking just a little tiny bit more material off, but it does wear down the sandpaper and it can create the pigtails because you're chewing up your sandpaper face. But all these, quite happy with how all these came out. A little bit of cleanup left to do, and then I just got to do the round over on the top and a little bit of sanding around that, and then it's ready for the finish. Was hoping to get all the build and shaping and stuff done tonight, but it is getting pretty late. Do have an early morning, so probably have to finish off a lot of this tomorrow, but yeah, maybe I'll play with the planes for a little bit before bedtime. See you tomorrow. So the build is done. I don't have it here in the shop with me, but look on the screen somewhere. We'll roll some video of the store with the brand new tables set up in there. Very happy. Yeah, some things to do differently, of course. I mean, that was a learning project mainly. As part trying to get something into the store to kind of help with the display and the presentation of it. It was also an opportunity to showcase some of the different types of stuff that we do, because a lot of the things that we have in the store right now are, you know, a lot of bandsaw boxes and toy games and things like that. We want to start bringing in some more of the artistic and some of the furniture type stuff. It's a small shop, but you know, we get some space, and you know, hopefully this will free up some space while also creating some place to put more things. But quite happy with how it turned out and the learning from the whole thing. You know, splines, got a lot of scraps here from the legs. When I cut those splines off, we'll find another project to use those in. Waste not, want not. And, you know, the stacking, you know, maybe the dimensions we could have done differently. We did use the golden ratio in terms of the size of the base table, the middle table, the top table, the size of the legs, the curvature of the spines. I mean, all these different things we try to calculate out. Some of those worked really well. Some of those we'll improve on. But, you know, ultimately very pleased with the end result. And it was kind of ironic because we got that set up in the store about a week ago. And, you know, there's been a little bit more traffic through the store. I mean, some of that is seasonal. People are getting past tax season. Maybe have a few bucks in their pocket and they're out shopping. Plus the weather's getting nicer. People are out a little bit more. But definitely getting more traffic into our shop. And, you know, but the ironic thing is we put it in there so we could, you know, showcase these things and be able to put more products and kind of break up the space a little bit. But like 4 people that work there and are supportive of the Logan Village Mall actually came up to us today and told us that people are interested in the tables. So it's great that they're interested in the products in there, but now they're interested in the tables, which is kind of cool to hear. A little overwhelming at the same time. It's like, well, what am I going to do if someone wants to buy that? You know, we'll sell it, but what are we going to do for display? So we'll see. We'll see. But it's definitely a blessing being able to make that, make it for the cost that we did and use the materials that we did. A lot of learnings, like I said, all around. So as always, let's kind of close out this video with some prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for the learnings. We thank you for the resources. We thank you for the gifts, for the opportunity to have this store, for the things that the family has done to be able to contribute to that. But all the resources, all the things you provided for us, Father. We hope that the store and everything in it and all of the work that we do brings you glory, and that we're able to raise funds for those causes that we feel called by your voice to support things, to support families and children. And Father, everything you give us, we don't deserve it, but it's through your grace and through your mercy that you allow us to have these resources and allow us to do things, and again, to hopefully bring you glory. And it is in your name, through our Savior, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. All right. Well, we're ready on to 50 other projects as always doing a lot more, making a lot more, learning a lot more. So stay tuned. Hoping to put out some more videos this year. This is, I think, the first full-length one. We put out a lot of shorts and seedlings and quick tip type things, but hoping to get some more bigger videos out there this year. So thank you for joining us. Take care and God bless.